Up on Miller Ridge, the wind is so constant that we keep a log of the nights it stops. There are only a handful of those nights in a year, and the old hands called them still nights, as if they were a season of their own. I keep the overnight shift at a relay transmitter site in western Montana, 2 hours of switchbacks above the nearest town with a stoplight. The station passes television and radio across the mountains for people I will never meet, and most nights it runs itself. My job is to be there when it doesn't, which means my job is mostly to be there. The building dates to the 50s, cinder block painted government green, one long equipment room, a bunk room, and a kitchenette with a kettle that predates the interstate. Racks of modern gear hum along the east wall, all status lights and cooling fans. In the corner by the window, under a canvas cover, sits a receiver the size of a footlocker, wooden case, round glass dial, vacuum tubes. Nobody makes parts for it anymore, and in 70 years nobody has moved it. On my first night, my predecessor handed me the duty log, the way other men hand over house keys. Wallace had kept the ridge for 31 years, and his instructions filled the front of the log in a careful draftsman's hand. Generator, heat tape, de-icing schedule, which breaker labels lie. On the last page of his instructions, boxed in pencil, was a note he made me read aloud back to him. On a night with no wind, uncover the corner set and switch it on, and give the tubes 10 minutes to come up. Band at 1420 on the dial, volume low, hallway light on. Write down what you hear, speak only between letters, and never try to record it. I asked him what I would hear at 1420, and he looked out the window at the tower lights for a while. The mail, he said, and shook my hand, and drove down the mountain into his retirement. For 3 months, the wind never once let up, and the note sat in the log like a joke I hadn't been told the front half of. 1420 is a dead channel in this valley, and it has been dead since the station down at Hollowayter surrendered its license in 1971. I looked that up in town, in the library's newspaper files, on one of my days off. The Valley Station used to run a program after midnight called The Night Mail, an hour of listeners' letters read over the air. People wrote in about lost dogs and porch swings and sons overseas, and a host named Ruth Ann Calloway read every letter in a voice the paper described as unhurried. The program ended when the station ended, mid-season in the spring. The last line of the last article said the station's mailbag went to the county landfill unopened. I remember disliking that sentence more than I could account for. The first still night of my tenure came in late October. I stepped outside a little after 1 in the morning, and the quiet came all the way up from the valley floor. The grass stood straight, the guy wires had stopped their singing, and the tower lights blinked on nothing at all. I went back in and uncovered the corner set, feeling half foolish and half like a man keeping an appointment. The tubes warmed from black to amber, and the dial glow came up the color of weak tea. At 1420, underneath the static, there was a carrier wave, steady as a pilot light. At 1:30 exactly, a tone sounded, and then a woman's voice, low and easy, said good evening, and thanked us for staying up. She said it the way you thank a friend who kept you company in a waiting room, as if it had mattered. Then she opened the first letter, and I heard the paper. The letter was from a rancher out toward the pass, no last name given, writing to say that the cottonwoods his father planted had finally met over the lane. He wanted somebody besides himself to know it, that was all, and Ruth Ann read it as if the trees were partly hers. The second was from a girl who had found a dog and was keeping it against her mother's judgment, and would the dog's owner please not exist. Ruth Ann laughed at that one, a small real laugh, and I caught myself smiling at a rack of equipment at 2 in the morning. Letter after letter, all of them small and all of them old. Coffee prices from another century, a bridge that has long since been replaced, an armistice anniversary counted in single digits. Nothing she read was frightening, and I want to be plain about that, because what I felt was not fright. It was the feeling of standing in the doorway of a room where something gentle is still going on, long after the house was supposed to be empty. At 3:10, the wind came back up the west face, the guy wires took up their note, and her voice folded into the static between two words. I sat a while with the hum of the tubes, then covered the set and wrote the date in the log, and under it, one word mail. Wallace's rules made themselves clear over the winter, the way good rules do, by almost being broken. On the second still night, I set my phone on the table to record a minute of her voice. For the log's sake, I told myself. The playback held only the sound of the room, the hum, the fans, my own chair creaking, and no voice under any of it. The set played on while I listened to that empty recording, and the pause before her next letter ran a beat longer than her others. I deleted the file and said out loud, feeling like a fool, that I would not do that again. Thank you, she said, to her next correspondent, for writing in, and my phone has stayed in the bunk room on the quiet nights since. The old pages of the log taught me the rest. Behind Wallace's instructions are summaries in 11 different hands, going back to a keeper who signed himself only HR in 1974. Every keeper of this station has sat up with the night mail, and every one of them wrote the letters down, first names, the gist, the date. Somebody sometime ruled a neat line down the margin and began keeping count. The tally stands above 1,000 letters now, and beside it, a keeper from the 80s penciled a guess I think about often. The mailbag went to the landfill unopened, he wrote, and she is reading her way through it anyway, one calm night at a time. I checked his arithmetic against my own winter of listening, and the pace holds. At a rate allowing for the wind, Ruth Ann Calloway has been reading for 55 years, and the bag is maybe 2/3 empty. My own letter came in February, on the 4th still night of the season. I say my own, though it was written 20 years before I was born. This one is from a woman in Hollowayter, Ruth Ann said, who asks that we say good night to her daughter, who is 6 years old and afraid of the dark. The woman wrote that her daughter believed the radio stayed awake all night so that nobody was ever the only one awake, and she did not have the heart to correct her. She asked that the girl's name be said over the air, so that if the child woke in the dark, she would know she had been thought of. And Ruth Ann said the name, and the name was my mother's. Her name, her town, the year she was 6, spoken low and plain on a dead frequency, to an audience of one relay keeper and the standing grass. I did not speak, because a letter was open. When it was folded away, I said good night, the way the keeper's log advises, and my voice did what it wanted to for a moment. In the morning, I drove down the mountain and called my mother from the library parking lot, where the signal is decent. I asked her, without saying why, whether Grandma had ever written to a radio program. She laughed and said her mother wrote to the night mail the winter she was 6 because of the dark, and the good night never came. The station closed that spring, she said, and Grandma held it against radio people for years, sure that nobody read a child's letter. I told her the reception up here does strange and wonderful things, and I left it there. Grandma has been gone since I was in high school, and my mother is 64, and somewhere between those two facts, her good night had finally been said. I think sometimes about the mailbag in the ground under the county landfill, if it is even there anymore. Paper does not last, but a letter is not exactly paper, any more than a song is exactly air. Whatever Ruth Ann is reading from, it does not seem to require the landfill's cooperation. The manuals in the rack have a term, store and forward, for a relay that holds a message until the path ahead clears. This has always been a relay station, is what I am saying, and some transmissions simply wait longer than others for a clear night. The new gear passes its traffic in milliseconds, and the corner set passes its traffic in decades, and both of them are doing the same work. I have added my own pages to the log now, dates, first names, the gist. Marjorie, whose husband finally fixed the gate. Thomas, aged 9, regarding the theft of a bicycle he had himself misplaced. A man who wanted the valley to know that his barn cat had come home after the fire, thinner but unbothered. Nothing in the bag, so far as I can tell, was ever urgent, and every word of it mattered enough to somebody to buy a stamp. On windy nights, which is most nights, I do my rounds and read the old summaries and let the guy wires sing me through the shift. On the still nights, I make tea and uncover the set and give the tubes their 10 minutes and turn the hallway light on. The tone sounds at 1:30, and Ruth Ann thanks us for staying up, and the night's first letter comes open with a sound like a small dry wing. There are a few hundred letters to go by the margin count, and after that I suppose she will rest, or begin on the letters nobody ever managed to write at all. Either way, this station will be attended. The wind can take its time.